I want to break it. I want to break up this session where you read, say 30 minutes or so, and then I want the rest of the group to give you feedback, specific feedback, not general feedback, but specific feedback on on the places where they lost you. Okay.
Okay.
So I might suggest that everybody get a piece of pencil or paper or something. And Susan says, I don't know how clear the audio will be. My audio is such that I cannot hear what is being said clearly. Well, I don't know what to say about that, Susan. I don't know how to help you with your audio, except for you to try to get it on your end working. But I want everybody to keep a little piece of paper or a pen, even a Post-it note like this. It doesn't matter. Tell me I want you to jot down the places where Kay loses you. And if the point is to have her read for 30 minutes. Now, I'd like Kay, before she reads, to tell us as listeners what her directives are in our listening. What do you want us to listen for? What do you want us to listen? The pace of the story? Do you want us to know? Do we get involved with the characters? Is it interesting? Is there intrusion? Is there breakage? Is it fragmented? Do we lose us in certain places and stuff? So, Kay, what is it you're going to read to us? What is it that you would like us to be attentive to?
Well, all the things you said, but also just whether there's too much detail, not enough detail. Do you get the mental picture of this, or is that not happening?
Okay. Also, a big one would be, is it interesting?
Yeah, well,
does it capture us, So go ahead and start, Kay. Give us the title and then read, and let us go ahead, and then make sure as listeners that we jot down our questions as they appear, as they occur to us. Okay, so go.
Okay, this is a novel that I'm writing that is about homeless people in Albuquerque. And, well, I'm not starting from the beginning, but I think you can get the picture anyway. All right. The next day, Fortuna woke with the sun, sitting on her suitcase with her back pressed against the black willow tree at the eastern edge of Tigway Park. She had been fortunate to find no one there when she arrived at dusk, having spent the afternoon reading in the sculpture garden of the Albuquerque Museum. The only place to sit there was a picnic table with no shade, and except for the handful of statues, there was nothing much to look at, but it was another place where she found she could usually be alone. A book, as always, helped her to while away the hours. When the security guard came to lock up, she walked slowly to the plaza to wait for the sun to go down when it would be dark enough to find a safe place to sleep. This morning, she was grateful for the gift of the tree. On a moonless night, uptight against the massive trunk, she was not able to be seen or arrested by a cop. Sleeping in the park was forbidden, but it was quiet and free, and she was well practiced at being unobtrusive. Her lame arm was stiff this morning, but she pushed herself up to standing, supported by the tree. She stretched her legs, repositioned her clothing and hat, gathered her belongings, and headed back to Plaza Don Luis, where there was a public bathroom. It should be deserted at this time of the morning. She would have enough time to wash up a bit before heading back to her place on the bridge. It was strange what happened there yesterday, she thought. The face of the boy in the river had appeared in a dream the night before, but he was running in the fields by her childhood home. Or maybe it was someone else. She struggled to recall details, but they had vanished, as dreams will. There was something familiar about the boy's face, but she had no friends or acquaintances in Albuquerque, so her mind struggled to recall where she might have seen him before. She pulled her suitcase through the deserted parking lot and across the plaza to the courtyard where the public bathrooms would be open by now. When she emerged 15 minutes later, the suffocating Albuquerque heat was rising. It would be good to get to her bench, set up her umbrella, and look far away to the north, appreciating the peace of nature without humans. But as she passed Los Compadres on Central Avenue, she could see that the roadblock was still in place. A solid line of cars, most with their red lights flashing, was causing another traffic tie-up as officers directed cranky motorists to go back the way they came. She was more irritated than curious. The north-facing bench was her spot. Whatever was happening down there was disrupting her established routine. She would have to think about where else to go for the day. She headed to a coffee shop in a strip mall nearby, where she would sometimes stop for a cup of coffee and a donut in the mornings. Fortuna left her suitcase behind a booth so she would be able to carry her styrofoam cup and donut in a bag in one hand. On her way back to the booth, she saw that someone had left a newspaper on a table. She retrieved it after setting down the coffee. She sat down and spread the front page of the Albuquerque Journal across the table. Banner headline: Homicide suspect not found after all-day Bosque manhunt, dominated a series of photos of the roadblock. Albuquerque Police Department homicide detectives are still searching for a man suspected of fatally shooting a man in front of a coffee shop on Central downtown Wednesday morning. So it was a murder. That's why they were chasing him. Fortuna scanned to the end of the story. The newspaper described the suspect as armed, dressed in black, and said that the officers lost him in the bosque. The manhunt was to continue all day. She assumed the police would be looking for her. She had not seen a gun, but this morning she could remember every detail of the boy's face. She didn't want to be found and drawn into a murder case. She had spent too much time and effort covering her tracks. She finished her coffee, stuffed the newspaper into the pocket of her suitcase, and stole out the back door and across the strip mall parking lot leading to a path used by residents of the trailer park behind it. At the corner was a secondhand store focusing on clothing and books. She went in, scanned the room until she spotted a plain black umbrella leaning against the wall behind a pile of shoes. Fortuna picked it up and marched to the elderly saleswoman sitting behind a desk at the front of the store. She brandished the rainbow umbrella. "Can I trade this for the black one?" The saleswoman looked surprised, but recognized a good trade. "Sure, but it's a pretty uneven trade. Is there anything else you'd like?" Fortuna crossed the room to replace the black umbrella with her colorful one. Some days the rainbow umbrella was the only sight that made her smile, but she couldn't allow herself to get nostalgic. It had to be done. She passed a bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks, and one facing outward caught her attention. The drawing on the cover was mysterious. There was a moon and water and a man gazing out to sea. She held it up, and the saleswoman nodded that she could take it. And the next important item of business, she needed another spot to spend her solitary day. Bench by the river was perfect, room for only one, and a good 200 yards from the next place any pedestrian might be tempted to stop and admire the view. And what a view it was. Fortuna had grown to love the river as a living thing. Its eternalness comforted her. She thrilled to its torrents after good rain and worried for its health in the dry months. She would miss it. She passed a very narrow residential street, hardly room for 2 cars to pass. Decided she would be too visible walking there. There were too many kitchen windows just a few feet from the road, and she knew she presented a strange picture in the neighborhood. A bit further on, there was a narrow vacant lot stretching nearly half a mile all the way to Rio Grande Boulevard, with a single overgrown tree hanging over the crumbling adobe wall on the south side. The sun was blazing now, and Fortuna instinctively headed for the only shade in sight. The day passed slowly under the tree as Fortuna struggled to adapt her plan to the new reality. Felt like a curse. When she arrived in Albuquerque in the abandoned casino up north, she had an old rolling suitcase filled with clothing. She had $43 and a broken arm that had not healed properly. She found her way to St. Bridget's, but knew she could not stay in shelters for very long. As soon as her money arrived at Armando's house, Diego would know she was in Albuquerque and would be looking for her. If he had discovered what she had taken from a shelf in his closet, there would be more than a broken arm to pay. Diego had not been mean when she married him. He had survived a tour in Vietnam and returned without any apparent wounds. But a run of bad luck 20 years later, failed harvest, which forced him to find a job, and a dislocated shoulder that caused him daily pain, had turned him vindictive instead of just indifferent as before. The young social worker at the hospital seemed to have her own problems, so she took Fortuna's word that her broken arm was an accident and helped her apply for disability, which allowed her to start planning her escape. Her husband didn't know Albuquerque, so he would only look in the most obvious places. He worked maintenance at the casino in the valley and didn't have many days off. Besides, he couldn't stay away too long from the hometown bars where his credit was good. So she spent her first months in Albuquerque at various homeless shelters, but was always searching for other places to spend the nights when it got warmer, and soup kitchens where she could eat until the disability checks started arriving at her Albuquerque post office box. She spent her days in the parks or in the coolness of the Old Town Plaza, where old trees shaded the iron benches. One day in April, she walked down Central to the river and discovered her bench. And now, with the police in the picture, the bench, the plaza, and the parks would be too dangerous, too obvious. She needed to be less conspicuous. Here, under the tree, the odds were pretty good that she would not be noticed. Occasionally, a stray dog would wander past, but the long, narrow expanse of dirt was barren and unappealing for strollers. Once a man came after his dog, who would then come back to the road. The man did not look at her directly. Sitting on her suitcase, she supposed she looked like a typical homeless person, and New Mexicans looked away from such hardships. Fortuna herself tried not to dwell on her own shaky position. She had very little income, and most of what she had was sent up north for her grandson, Jesse, who deserved another chance to build a life when he got out of the county jail, where he was serving time for passing bad checks. He had no one else to help him escape what seemed to be the fate of so many young men up north. His father, her son Armando, was a poor example. Fortuna had been trained by her upbringing to believe that boys should be given their head, so she didn't speak up about his behavior until it was way too late. When she realized the folly of this strategy, he was already lost. He dropped out of high school and spent his days drinking in a friend's trailer and began accumulating DWIs. He was too proud to go to rehab and had lost his driver's license before he turned 20. He got temporary jobs from time to time, but tended to neglect bills in favor of nights at the bar. The only thing he did right was to marry Olivia, who was her only ally in helping her Jesse escape a similar life. Thinking about helping Jesse gave her a boost of energy, and she hugged the tree trunk to stand, stretched her sore back, and headed east. She decided to take a chance on one last meal at the Good Shepherd Soup Kitchen. Until the
Kay,
police
excuse me a minute, Kay. Could you read
Yes.
a little slower? I'm starting to lose the details.
Okay. Okay, where was I? Until the police arrested the young man from the river, she would have to stay out of sight. How long could that take? A few hours later, she headed back to Tigway Park, hoping to find her spot from the night before. But cutting through the park from the museums, she could see she was out of luck. A couple was camped underneath the tree, had spread a blanket to sleep on. They would be evicted later on, she thought, but it would be too late for her to reclaim the spot. She crossed back through the park and entered the narrow streets of Old Town. She reached the corner of the block where Indian jewelry vendors were gathering their wares and blankets, wrapping up their day of haggling with tourists, when a long black car pulled slowly alongside her. The windows were tinted black, too. It looked like the car of some of her son's lowrider friends, except plain. The cars up north were more lavishly decorated. usually with saints and flames. Even with the windows closed, the pounding bass could be felt blocks away, and everyone within a block radius could hear the words of the hypnotic refrain. Gonna take my horse to the old town road, gonna ride till I can't no more. A young woman jumped out of the back seat and took several pictures of herself on the empty corner. She had long, straight black hair, dark skin, and looked Indian. After a lifetime of being uncommonly dark, Fortuna always noticed shades of skin. She was called Negrita as a child. Some said it affectionately, just teasing, they said, when she cried. But she knew in her heart that it was something significant and that it brought no gifts. She wondered why she had chosen that spot for a photograph until she squinted at the green street sign on a pole, Old Town Road. Ever since she was a young woman, Fortuna paid close attention to coincidences. She believed them to signify something, but she seldom could figure out exactly what that was. Car drove off. She would have to stop and rest in a safe place and think about it further. Fortuna crossed the street and pulled open the heavy wooden door of the 200-year-old Catholic church. She was relieved to see it was empty so she could think. When in company, she feared that other people in the room could hear her thoughts, but it always comforted her to think of all the people through the centuries who had brought their troubles here. But she did not pray. She did not think God was listening to her. She thought about her daughter, Esperanza, who had fled the family for a new life in Mexico. Unlike Armando, she was dark-skinned like her mother and endured the same comments about it when she was young. One weekend, Esperanza attended a health fair at the Sikh ashram in the valley and never came home. Fortuna had visited her there once, but later received a letter saying she was going to Mexico to be married. Her guru, she said, had arranged it. She had not met her prospective husband. Fortuna tried to imagine her daughter's life in a faraway city. She told herself stories about how wonderful it must be for Esperanza to have a husband and wondered if she had grandchildren in Mexico. She had no way to contact her. Fortuna tried to get information at the ashram, but was politely rebuffed. Families would be Fortuna stayed in the coolness of the church until a caretaker came to lock up for the night, then sat in the courtyard of the old convent next door until sunset, when she ventured back into the plaza. A group of several dozen tourists had assembled under the portal of a restaurant across the street, listening to a tall, bearded man serving as their ghost tour guide. The Old Town Plaza was continuously inhabited for more than 300 years, and tales of ghost sightings went back almost as long. Attempting to scare tourists with the doings of the supernatural beings inhabiting some of the oldest of the adobe houses in the neighborhood was a nightly ritual. The man stood in the street before his audience. "Here's what I can tell you," he said. "A dozen patrons of this restaurant had their orders taken by a young girl in an old-fashioned black dress and high-buttoned shoes. When a waitress asked if they had decided what to eat, they said the young girl had taken care of them. The waitress called for her manager and had them repeat what they had seen. Over the years, other patrons had recounted the same experience. These people were not acquainted and had no way of knowing about the previous sightings or that the young girl died of scarlet fever in that house in 1805. In her portrait, which had vanished years ago, she was wearing a black dress and those same shoes." Two women on the tour looked at each other and seemed to shiver. Fortuna kept walking. Life held so many things more frightening than ghosts. She could not stay on the plaza where regular police patrols kept watch over the sources of tourist dollars. She could not go back to the vacant lot. It was deserted, even in the daytime, and now it was too dark. She could barely make out the branches of the lone tree swaying in the nighttime breeze. There were benches along some of the side streets in Old Town, but they were all well lit, and no loitering signs were posted here and there. Heading north would take her to the highway overpass, a popular spot for other homeless souls, but there had been robberies and assaults there too. South was Central Avenue, a dangerous place for anyone at night. She stood on the sidewalk, willing her brain to come up with a plan. Suddenly, across the street, the answer seemed to appear, a small wrought iron bench under a honey locust tree that nearly obscured it from her view. A tall trash can hid it from another angle, but its best feature was that it did not face the street, unlike every other bench in Old Town. This one faced the parking lot of a rambling complex of adobe houses. Except for two-story buildings close to the street, the others were single-family houses without yards, so there were fewer cars and no children. On this bench, just beyond the reach of a streetlight, she might even be able to sleep a bit. Old Town was deserted by tourists after the shops closed, and passing cars would not notice her sitting there. As she hurried across the street between cars, she thanked the spirits and the saints and the universe. It was perfect. That's the end of a section about Fortuna. The next section is about a different person. Should I keep reading? Should I keep reading even though there's a transition here?
Hold on. What part of what section was that in your memo, in your novel?
Well, very close to the beginning. There was one other section before it, which I read at another time, either in this class or at the seminar, about her witnessing the boy running from the police after the murder.
Well, listen, one of the things, what do the rest of you think? I mean, I think your reading was blurred by faulty audio. I don't know. Every time you leaned in, Kate, in some way, it blurred the audio, and then you leaned out again, and it was clear. Then you leaned in, it was blurred. Then you leaned out, and it was clear. And number two, I was a little distracted because you were leaning to the right or talking down to yourself, and that's when I had a hard time hearing you. And I also was distracted by the fact that I was only seeing half of your head while you were reading.
Yeah,
And
well,
you know, and I thought, well, you need to put yourself in the frame and read slower. Put yourself in the frame, read slower, and don't position your head downward where your voice gets muffled. Try to read slower, try to keep yourself in frame, and try to keep a distance from your mic in a way that it's clearer. So read another 10 minutes and let's see. Quite a bit of compliment to you already, but everybody mute themselves. Everybody mute themselves. Okay, give us 10 more minutes and then we'll do feedback with you.
okay. Well, this
But go
next
slow,
section-
read slow, and yeah, keep yourself like that. That's good.
Okay, the next section is another character, Gus. When Gus finally heard the car pulling away from his front door in the morning, he sat down hard on the couch and dropped his head into his hands. He had to tolerate some bad house guests in the past, but this couple was the very worst. His uncle in Santa Fe, who owned the ramshackle adobe, let him live there for the price of utilities. But this was the downside of the deal. Whenever Tio Carlos needed to do someone a favor, which was increasingly often, Gus had to play host to assorted characters, some of them irritating and all of them in his way. He was on a mission to rebuild his life. Gus started sweeping potato chip crumbs from the couch into his hand, but most of them went onto the rug, which was already strewn with fast food bags and empty Schlitz 40s. The pair had appeared 2 nights ago. They took over both the spare bedroom and the living room and drank and quarreled and watched loud reality TV with only rare breaks to walk down to Lottaburger or drive to the grocery store up on the block. Gus loved his uncle and always watched out for him, but he needed a fresh start away from the influences of his homies in Santa Fe. His uncle had just evicted his previous tenants from the house. He couldn't even be bothered to take the trash to the road, his uncle said. Garbage was being run over in the parking lot. They took no pride in where they lived. I will expect better from you, Gustavo. The house was old, with a roof that leaked and badly in need of some plaster, but it was set back from the street behind another building. Gus's uncle had written the house number in white paint over the front door. It looked like bad graffiti to delivery people who didn't always recognize it as an address. The house was part of a warren of old crumbling adobe casitas under a canopy of tall Chinese elms and locust trees. These dwellings.
Okay, hold on, okay. Okay, you're covering your mic with your paper. And there's all this, there's a lot of noise when you're moving your paper around and you're covering the mic, and we lose you for like 30 seconds at a time, and then you come back in.
Mhm.
You got to be careful not to cover the mic with the paper, number one. And number two, when you flip the paper around, the mic's picking all that stuff up and it's drowning your voice out. So go back about a minute and pick up the reading from there. Remember, every piece of paper that you move, your mic is picking all that up. It's like a bulldozer knocking down a building. And then the second thing is, you don't put your paper in front of the mic because it blocks the sound. There's all these little things you have to do as a reader to ensure that, because when you don't do it, when you just speak to the mic, you come out clear. So you got to be conscious of these things. So go for it.
Okay, you want me to go back to the beginning of this last bit?
Yeah.
Okay. When Gus finally heard the car pulling away from his front door in the morning, he sat down hard on the couch and dropped his head into his hands. He had to tolerate some bad house guests in the past, but this couple was the very worst. His uncle in Santa Fe, who owned the ramshackle adobe, let him live there for the price of utilities. But this was the downside of the deal. Whenever Tio Carlos needed to do someone a favor, which was increasingly often, Gus had to play host to assorted characters, some of them irritating and all of them in his way. He was on a mission to rebuild his life. Gus started sweeping potato chip crumbs from the couch into his hand, but most of them went onto the rug, which was already strewn with fast food bags and empty Schlitz 40s. The pair had appeared 2 nights ago. They took over both the spare bedroom and the living room and drank and quarreled and watched loud reality TV with only rare breaks to walk down to Lottaburger or drive to the grocery store up on 12th Street. Gus loved his uncle, who had always watched out for him. When he needed a fresh start away from the influences of his homies in Santa Fe, his uncle had fortuitously just evicted his previous tenants from the house. They couldn't even be bothered to take out the trash, his uncle said. Garbage was being run over in the parking lot. They took no pride in where they lived. I will expect better from you, Gustavo. The house was old, with a roof that leaked and badly in need of some plaster. Since it was set back from the street behind another building, Gus's uncle had written the house number in white paint over the front door. It looked like bad graffiti to delivery people who didn't always recognize it as an address. The house was part of a warren of old crumbling adobe casitas under a canopy of tall Chinese elms and locust trees. These dwellings were flanked by a row of shabby apartments to the north, but a newer two-story building to the south, housing an art gallery on the ground floor and 2 apartments above. Most of the ground floor windows were covered with iron grillwork to deter break-ins. Some of the roofs to the north sported satellite dishes and the occasional swamp cooler. The house where Gus now lived had been the family home of Tia Carmen, Tio Carlos's wife, who inherited it along with its hefty Old Town tax burden. She had died 10 years ago, and Carlos had rented out the house ever since. It needed a lot of work, but was in a desirable neighborhood, so he could be charging more rent to someone else, but then he would not be able to use it as a hostel. Since it was a small house, Carlos had a revolving door system. Gus had concluded. He suspected there was more to know about why his honest and hardworking uncle had so many debts to repay, but Gus hadn't felt free to ask questions. Behind the large front room was a small, grimy kitchen, tiny bath, and 2 bedrooms. Gus had initially moved into the larger bedroom, but when the guests began to arrive with regularity, he decamped to the smaller one in back for a little privacy. There was no question of quiet. The interlopers rarely cared that Gus had to be at work at 8. He grabbed his keys and looked around. Cleaning up the mess would have to wait until he finished his shift cooking at the Central Avenue diner. His boss had seemed pleased with him lately, and he didn't want to mess that up. His counselor at rehab had encouraged him to think bigger about his life, so he had begun to harbor dreams of becoming kitchen supervisor. If he could make a little more money, he could move into his own apartment and avoid having a parade of increasingly infuriating short-term roommates. And maybe when he had won her trust, Julia might visit him there. Maybe he could even afford a car, he thought, as he walked down Central Avenue, or a bicycle anyway. When he got to work, the breakfast rush was in full swing. A new waitress, Lorena, smiled at him as she carried a tray of coffee cups to a table by the front window. He nodded hello, went to the back, clocked in, and grabbed a clean apron from his locker. He wished he had gotten a few more hours sleep, but it was hard to relax with the bass from the old stereo system turned way up. It felt like it was shaking the walls of his room and thumping in his chest. He had emerged from his room to ask his so-called guests to turn it down, and they apologetically agreed, but if they had lowered the volume, it was imperceptible. Gus hoped he would be able to sleep tonight. His uncle usually gave him a little notice before springing a new arrival on him. They had spoken the day before about the last one, who was apparently a friend of one of Gus's cousins. He had never been close to those cousins, although they had all gone down the same path of alcohol and drug abuse. But he had never heard of any of them going to rehab. Gus had gone 3 times. Hopefully the last one would stick. Obviously, alcohol was the family problem. The younger generations liked drugs too, but even the older men either had to eventually come to sobriety or die in a car accident or of liver failure. Gus had grown up in a middle-class neighborhood in Santa Fe, in a house his mother bought with her insurance settlement after his dad died in a fiery wreck on I-25. His mother was a trained beautician, but could only work from home because she couldn't afford childcare for Gus and his 3 sisters. They didn't go hungry, but there was little money left over for clothes and toys. So they grew up feeling deprived compared to the other children on the block. So when they were old enough to commit petty thefts, they felt entitled to do it. Gus put his friend Tommy's red Hot Wheels car in his pocket one day, but was afraid to play with it when anyone else was around. No one in his house would have cared that he stole it, but they might have tried to sell it. When Gus was 9, his mother accompanied her boyfriend to a drug deal behind an empty storefront and was killed with a shot to the head. By then, her pretty face had been transformed by years of drug and alcohol abuse. Gus had loved her fiercely and mourned her deeply. He and his sisters were split up and went to live with various relatives. Gus went initially to an aunt and uncle who lived in a mountain village up north, but he was angry and did not adjust well to such a lonely life. After a few months, he was taken in by another aunt in the bigger town down in the valley. This time, there were older cousins to buffer his loneliness and minimal supervision by their working mother. Out of gratitude to his newfound companions, he soon joined in their activities, which included convincing strangers to buy 40s of malt liquor they could consume in the woods along the river. As time went on, they graduated to marijuana and eventually to heroin, both plentiful and cheap in the valley. Gus got his driver's license at 16 and lost it before he turned 18 after a string of DWIs while driving his aunt's car. The last time he was stopped, there were also drugs in the car. As part of his plea bargain, he went to rehab. He spent 30 days at Delancey Street in El Calde and intended to stay clean when he got out. But back in his old surroundings, he soon relapsed. He did a stint in another rehab the following year with similar results. That's when Tio Carlos stepped in. Back in Santa Fe without a car, Gus disconnected with his running buddies up north. His uncle rented him a room in his house, got him a construction job, and drove him to AA meetings. He seemed to be adjusting to the straight life, but a year later, he was furloughed from his job and with time on his hands, found a bar within walking distance of the house. Events unwound as could be expected, and Gus found himself back in rehab. But that was where he met Julia. Serious and shy, she was not like the other girls in rehab. She didn't have the tough shell. Julia had become dependent on OxyContin after breaking a leg in a hiking accident, and that had led to heroin. From his first glimpse of her, Gus was entranced. She was a beautiful girl, and he found himself stealing glances at her during group therapy. To his surprise and delight, she seemed drawn to him after he spoke about how his uncle had saved him from himself years ago and his sadness at having disappointed him. He and Julia became friends, and when she was discharged a few weeks later, she declared that she would see him when he got out, only if he stayed clean for a year. Here was the reason he needed to walk the straight line. With his uncle's help, he moved away from bad company again, this time to Albuquerque. Later in the day, Gus was in the back helping to put together a complicated lunch order for a large group when he heard what sounded like 2 gunshots. Rushing out of the kitchen, he watched half the people in the diner get up and rush to the front windows. "¿Qué pasó? ¿Qué pasó?" said an old man at the counter who could not see past the people standing in front of him. "He just shot that guy," cried a woman who had just come in the front door. "He grabbed his bike and shot him." Gus pushed through the crowd to where he could see the street. A man lay on the ground with blood on his chest. People on the street were pointing down Central towards the river. On the other side of the street, Gus could see a figure in black on a silver bicycle heading west. "Call 911, someone yelled. But one of the bystanders on the sidewalk must have already called because the first police car arrived seconds later, lights flashing, followed by an ambulance and several other police cars. 2 of the cars sped up Central toward where the gunman had disappeared on the bike. One of the first officers on the scene stood at the door of the diner to prevent anyone else from coming outside, while another one squatted down by the victim, feeling for a pulse. Gus was pretty sure he was dead. There was a lot of blood, and his eyes were open and fixed. When the paramedics arrived, they confirmed that he was deceased. By this time, the scene inside the diner had devolved into chaos. People were shouting, demanding to be let out the door, and several women were crying. A tall cop entered and pushed back the crowd. He had to shout to be heard over the commotion. "We will need to talk to each of you," he said. "Whether or not you saw what happened, you may have other important information. We will have to ask you to stay until we can talk to you." A waitress came out from behind the counter, tried to comfort one sobbing woman, sitting her down at an open booth and bringing her a glass of water. "There were shots, and he was covered with blood," she said, gasping and wiping her nose with the sleeve of her shirt. The decibel level had fell a bit as the shell-shocked patrons returned to their tables to await their turn to speak to the police. Most of them passed the time on their phones, rehearsing their statements on Twitter and Facebook. The diner closed for business, but Gus had to stay until the police had finished with all the possible witnesses several hours later. He considered texting Julia, but they had agreed not to do that too often, so he refrained. Julia said he needed to be happy by himself before he could be happy with another person, so he tried not to appear too needy, even when he felt needy. Instead of going home, he headed down Central toward where the shooter had disappeared on his victim's bicycle. When he reached the parking lot for the aquarium and biopark, he could see the lights of the police cars ahead at the roadblock. They had pushed the bystanders back to Los Compadres, but a few dozen diehards were lingering and sharing the general opinion that the suspect had eluded police, crossed the river, and was hiding in the bosque. They'll get him, one old man said. Where can he go? Even if he drowned in the river, they'll find him. Gus was tired and his feet were hurting from walking. He headed back to his house, cutting through back alleys behind the strip malls. When he got home, he turned on the news and learned that the police had still not found the killer, who reportedly had shot the victim because he would not give up his bike. According to the on-screen reporter, the killer rode the bike to the river, then jumped in. The news footage showed helicopters circling the area where he disappeared and boats patrolling the riverbanks. But the killer, described only as young, of medium height, and wearing black jeans and a black t-shirt, had seemingly vanished into the thickets of the bosque. Gus flipped through the television channels but couldn't find any more local news. He went into the kitchen and found a few slices of pizza in the refrigerator. They were not too old, leftovers from Tony and May the night before. Gus nuked them for a minute in the microwave, then brought them back to the living room. He turned on the PS3 and played Resident Evil for a couple of hours. He really liked living in his uncle's house. He just wished the visitors weren't so sketchy. Most of them he didn't trust, and he hid his PlayStation 3 in a drawer in his room when he had to leave them in the house. He preferred being in the front of the house, closer to the front door and the street. It felt less safe in the back since there was no back door. As was his habit when he had the place to himself, Gus fell asleep on the couch and slept through the night. The next morning, he overslept. He took a quick shower, jogged the 2 blocks to the diner, arriving out of breath. The place was packed and humming with speculation and gossip about the drama of the day before. There were still traces of blood on the sidewalk out front. They still have the bridge blocked off, said Lorenzo, the cook, who lived west of the river. I had to cross over on Bridge Street. Traffic was all fucked up. I guess they didn't find the guy yet. APD no vale nada. I went down there yesterday, Gus said. They had boats and helicopters. It was like an army down there. I can't believe they couldn't find one guy on foot. In the course of his shift, Gus heard any number of theories about where the killer went and why the cops couldn't find him. The bosque was a wild place with many places to hide. There were also camps of homeless who had built lean-tos that could be quickly disassembled when the cops came around to roust them when some biker complained or some hiker complained. Sometimes kids would set fires in the bosque, which would also clear them out, if only temporarily. Hours later, Gus was getting ready to clock out when his cell phone buzzed in his pocket. He hoped it was Julia. He had texted her last night about the murder, but she hadn't responded. He looked at his phone and sighed. It was from his uncle. Very important, it read. At 9 tonight, turn off outside lights and unlock the door. Call me when he's there. Who is coming? He texted back. This was an unwelcome development. He was looking forward to having the place to himself for another night. Now this mystery guest. Shit. Just call me when he's there. We'll talk. Tio Carlos had never given him so little information, nor so little notice about a house guest, and he had a bad feeling about it. Shortly before 9, he looked through the iron bars on the front windows, but the parking lot was still. Judging from the number of cars, everyone across the way was home for the night. There was a row of lights outside those units that burned all night. Gus stepped outside and saw a figure sitting on the bench by the road. Viejita, he thought. Why was she there? Did she have something to do with the mysterious visitor? He started to walk toward the bench, but when a car passed and spilled light onto her for a few seconds, he could see she seemed to be asleep, sitting up. He retreated back to the house, turned out the lights. The space before his front door went black. There was no moon tonight. Gus sat on the couch and turned off all the inside lights and also the television so he could hear someone approaching. He could also hear his heart beating. The dog barked a few houses away, but otherwise the neighborhood was quiet. It was close to 10 when he heard footsteps, someone running and breathing hard. The door flew open and a shadowy figure stood outside, panting and shaking. Gus jumped up and pulled the boy into the house, slamming the door shut. That's the end of that section. The next section is about another character.
Okay. Remember, if you all want feedback on your work, you're going to have to read. That was almost an hour, Kay. So we're going to have to cut our feedback a little on this. But okay, so I want all of you to be careful how you treat your mics on your computers as you speak. Speak to your mic, but give Kay some feedback on this. Let's say 10 minutes because Kay read almost a whole hour, so we're going to have to. I wanted to get 20 minutes of feedback, but that's not going to be possible. But we're learning. It's not a big deal. So do me a favor. Give Kay some feedback really quick, and then we'll take a 5-minute get up and stretch, come back, and start the next reader. So what's the feedbacks? Let's go around. Don't get too long-winded on it, but give Kay some feedback. Who's first?
I'll go first. Just because of time, I'm just going to cut it short. I got a good sense of Fortuna as a character, no matter what the details were that you were describing. With Gus, I found myself a few times just kind of zoning out because it was listing all the things that was happening in his life. I really didn't get a sense of Gus for how he was experiencing all the things that you were describing. For instance, when you talked about him going back to rehab, I got no sense of what that would have been like to go back to rehab. And right before that, you listed a whole list of things about him. But I lost him as a character. So it was like hearing a resume. So that was my one, main issue with Gus, because I did get a sense of Fortuna. All the things she was interested in and the things that she was afraid of and the things that she was careful about. But with Gus, I got none of that. At least I didn't pick it up. So that's my one comment about that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question? And we don't want to get too long-winded on this. What would you recommend for Kay in order to pierce the veneer of her character? How do we
I would be interested to know what it was like for him to go back to rehab and what it was like for him, the whole list of things that you talked about happening to Gus right before he went back to rehab. Take each of those things and imbibe an emotion or disappointment or, how it affected his life, something personal. So I don't know how you want Gus, what kind of character you want him to have. Does he have integrity? Is he trying really hard to overcome something? Does he just not give a damn and he's letting life fall where it may and he's back into rehab and now he gets, 3 meals and a bed? So it's those personal things about him from the inside that I missed. And I really had a struggle to focus on what you were saying because he wasn't in it to ground me. Does that make sense, Kay?
Yes, it does. I mean, my feeling about it was always him getting back with his friends that, would.
So what was that like for him? Because you do it with Fortuna. I mean, I really got a sense of Fortuna. I can feel her. I could see her. Whether my vision was exactly how you envisioned her, I related to how she's relating to her life, but I didn't get that feeling with Gus. I couldn't get grounded in him.
Okay, we've got to move on. Who's next? Who's next on feedback?
Can I quickly before the dogs start? So, Kay, thank you for being brave and going first with all the technical difficulties. I would give up at that point. So, I don't know Albuquerque at all. And there was one particular line that I just loved that brought it alive, and more of that with Gus, because I agree with Jan about Gus, and I got more of a sense of Fortuna. There's a beautiful line where you talk about a small wrought iron bench under a heavy, I think it was locust tree.
Mhm.
That kind of vivid detail, so it was grounded, but that kind of gave me a sense of being there for someone who doesn't know it. So where there was the detail like that really was grounding and it was slow, that helps me. So maybe with Gus, even his childhood, more about his childhood. Why did his mother feel like she had to get involved in drugs? That personal sense of who he was and his thought processes would really have kind of brought it up to where Fortuna was. But thank you.
Thank you.
Susan?
I want to thank Kay as well for your courageous maiden voyage here. And I apologize, I probably didn't hear the first half of your reading because my audio was so compromised, but for some reason it cleared up for the last, let's say, 15 minutes.
Well, we sure lost you on that one, didn't we, Susan? I don't know.
More technical difficulties.
Well, I think you froze up, Susan. I'm not sure what's going on, but listen, here's what I think. Susan, are you talking? I can't hear you. All right. Let me just say this, everyone. I think you're too nice to your characters. You know, you're the narrator. It's not you. You're not in the equation. I'm talking about the narrator is too nice to these characters where you leave them almost flawlessly unblemished. If this is about substance abuse, and it seems so far that it is, it seems that substance abuse has in some way really ruined these people, screwed them up. You know, I want to hear about these characters as being totally screwed up, because that's what substance abuse does. That's what trauma does. It screws you up. It messes you up, you know? Yeah, I think just as an aside, Susan, your connection, the strength of your connection is weak. You have to embolden its vigor. You have to make the connection stronger on your end, Susan. But it's Susan's connection strength. You have to get more power in there. But let me just continue. Your characters. The first one, I got no inclination who this woman was. You were moving this. The narrator was moving this character through the landscape without any sort of feeling or disgust or loathing or love. I mean, this was a person that was moving through the landscape pretty much vacant emotionally, pretty much. You know, I wanted to see, like, let me tell you, like, of everything that you read, what I remember most clearly is the restaurant scene at the window when that shot went off. Why? Because there was dramatic conflict. Everybody rushed to the window. There was actual dialogue. Did you see that? Who was the guy? There he goes that way. It was a great scene. And then all of a sudden we went back to this passive narration of the characters. Instead of letting the characters take over the page, letting the characters take over their story, instead of the narrator trying to control the characters, let the characters control the narrator. Characters, when I went and spoke to hundreds of homeless people in Miami, and I found most of them would be really, really mean and untrustworthy and not trusting you. I was wanting to see this homeless lady pull out a knife, or at least in the morning, at least pull the knife out and sharpen it or something to protect herself with. You know, she's moving through this world where people are going to be preying on her. You know, I wanted to see something that broke her spirit. What was that took her there? What was that took her over the line? And I wanted to see it in a dramatic form. I wanted to see something appear to her on the lawn, something to give her flesh. Right now, she's simply an idea. I need her to be feeling. I need to remember her. I need to remember her by something she does that's uniquely her own. Action. Right now, she's simply an invention of the narrator. And maybe she gets better through time, and maybe you purposely started her slow. But in a lot of these cases, there's a blueprint, but I want that blueprint filled in. And the narrator needs to let these characters
Breathe.
get righteously pissed off at the world, get righteously really sad over what they regret, get righteously angry. You know, like if somebody's passing by this homeless woman under a tree, the homeless people I know really look at me with disgust. For some reason, most of them have mental ill problems. Most of them should be on medication. Most of them, and then this other guy in Santa Fe, he's basically somebody with his hand out. I mean, if I was writing his character, I'd call him just a, gimme character. Come on, make the guy either a total asshole or make him something, but make him something. This whole gray area, putting our characters in the gray area. What's the ambition? What are the secrets? What's the sexual secrets? What was the trauma? Was it sexually induced poverty because they couldn't control their addiction to this or that or this? What do they do? How do they sleep? I mean, it's a million things, but you've got to be able to let us know the characters. I don't know them. Look, it's 9:07. And the way, number one, you can never read as fast as you read. Because that was my problem. When you started reading at the very beginning, I was like, oh, please slow down, please slow down, please slow down, you know? And then the first thing I thought about was feelings. You were moving the character, well, the narrator was moving the characters around, but I needed feelings, you know? Like for instance, just a very small example, walking. The homeless woman walks. I wanted to know what the sound of that walk was. Was it a lonely sound? Was it, I feel liberated and I'm free which I don't think, but with the way people walk and the sound that they make I see a lot of homeless people walking, and I can guarantee you that every one of their walks is uniquely different. Some of the walks are just bemused wanderings. Other of the walks are the saddest walks I've seen people walk. Homeless people have the saddest walks, you know? Does somebody come up to a homeless person and spit in her face? Does someone yell at her? Does another friend of them say, hey, don't do that, she's homeless? I mean, what does the public think about this homeless person? You know, you got so much to work with. The narrator has so much to work with. Work with it, okay? And don't move your papers around by the mic. When you're reading, always project your voice into the mic. Don't go down or else you lose us. And don't go like this. Well, I can't do it, but anyway, it makes a lot of sounds. The beginning's very fuzzy for me, I put, and the umbrella thing lost me. When you focus on something like an umbrella like that or do something like that, it just loses me because I want to know what's the point. Why did you put the umbrella thing in there? Where she goes in and she wants, I don't know, you know?
I think a couple of these things problems are because I didn't start at the beginning. The umbrella is
No matter where
explained
you
at the
start at,
beginning.
no matter where you start at a story, no matter where you start at, we should be able to get the gist of it right then and there. You can't, like, there's a lot of poets that'll stand up and call them prose poems. I don't know what they want to call them, but a lot of poets will stand up and they'll have an agenda, like let me speak from my vagina, and it's like, okay, that's one agenda, right? Or let me give you the background on the story. And they'll go on and on and on and on. We don't even care about that. We just want to care what's on the page. Read what's on the page, and if we get it, we get it. If we don't, we don't. Like, it would have been cool as listeners, had you taken that woman out of the store with the umbrella and she went up to the first pedestrian and she stabbed him. Let her stab the pedestrian. And now all of a sudden we begin to realize parts of her character are really whack, but that's beautiful. We want that. We want that. We want something like that. We don't want nothing. We want something like, let her come out and give the umbrella to a guy in a wheelchair who's a Vietnam vet, and let him hold it while they push down the street. And the son's,
She's one of the good characters. There are other characters in the story that are very bad.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't care.
They're the good ones.
I don't care how good the character is. There's badness in that character. I'm not saying elevate badness to a virtue. No, I'm saying you got to bring them both in. You got to bring in the goodness and the badness of any human being. Of any human being. Sometimes I am so horrible to people in my life that I regret being that way, and I check myself. That's a bad part of me that I want to try to correct. But you got to put this stuff in. Now listen, we're going overboard here.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.
Who's the next reader? Susan, is your sound working? Susan, if your sound's not working, is your sound working, Susan? If not, then I would guess we go with Camille. Okay, it's really weak. I guess Susan's not. Can you hear us, Susan? Can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me? Camille, you're going to read for 30 minutes only, and then we're going to critique your work, okay?
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound perfect, but did you get what I was saying earlier about your mic, not talking fast, not crumpling all your papers in front, don't block the sound with your papers? Did you get all that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's do this, everybody. Let's take a 3-minute stretch break. Be back here in 3.5 minutes or something, okay? And then we'll start. But let's get up and stretch a little bit. Oh. Oh. Ow. can you guys, let's see, you can hear me, right? Yeah, good. Give me a toothache. When was the last time the homeless lady fell? What hurt on her? Anyway, little things like that make all the difference in the world. Okay. Leslie, welcome to the group. Okay, everybody, we're going to hear Camille. Turn off your mics and let's go ahead and read, Camille.
Okay. So I'm going to read a couple of pieces. The first one, all of this is sort of stuff in progress, and I have to admit, I don't know if I have a full half hour's worth of reading, but we'll see. I packed my dad's small leather suitcase for the only nursing home I'd found in LA with an open bed for someone on Medi-Cal. A few neatly ironed plaid cotton short sleeve button-down shirts, starched beige denim slacks, boxers, hat, shoes, a jar of dippity-doo, and his black plastic pocket comb. Damn, Beto said. Looks like your pop's going on tour with the Beastie Boys. Beto helped me get through those days. We'd met through a friend shortly after I'd tracked down my father, following years of estrangement, only to find out he had cancer. Then came surgery, complications, delirium. A harrowing day at the hospital, Dad rubbing his wrist raw against straps bolted to the metal bed frame, struggling to get up. It was for his safety, I was told. He kept trying to put out all his IVs. He confused me, his only child, for my cousin Sonia. You're going to have to find a place to take him, the nurse told me. You're going to have to do something about the car, too, she said, referring to the broken down Yugo left abandoned and leaking oil in the hospital parking lot. Long weekend drives ensued from Oakland to LA and back through vast agricultural plains of the Central Valley in rent-a-wrecks leased on credit on Friday afternoons around the corner from my job. Stench of death and cow shit through the cattle-killing fields of Coalinga. Corridos on Radio Bilingüe driving through Fresno. Fields turned from lush green to light gold as the seasons changed. Almonds and oranges and collard greens and cotton. Oil fields with rusty iron pump jacks that creak like creaking industrial-sized birds pecking at the ground off the side of the highway before making the climb up the grapevine to the crest of the Los Padres National Forest, past Pyramid Lake, then down past Magic Mountain before descending into the megapolis of the Angels. Beto was known by many names. His given name was Adalberto Alvarez, but he was known to most simply as Al or Big Al. Then one day, Sea Dog said he looked like a garguño. It was one of those made-up words that made no sense but fit and that stuck. But when we first started seeing each other, I'd asked him if anyone'd ever call him Beto, and it touched him. It's what they used to call him when he was a kid, and it's who he became to be. Beto was an aspiring filmmaker from El Paso who drowned everything he ate in Tabasco sauce and was forever discovering obscure spots in the far reaches of the city. Broad-chested and beefy without being fat, brown skin, kinky black hair, thick black-rimmed glasses, and a perfect voice for singing oldies. Beto was hard-headed, but had a huge heart and lived by a code. Just like me, just like my father. He helped me pack up my father's belongings from the senior living facility, piles of papers and scribbled notebooks, old Dizzy Gillespie and Carlos Gardel records, his prized two-tiered harmonica, and we put them in storage. we used to daydream about riding around Brooklyn on lowrider bicycles, and at night, me overwhelmed and heartbreaking, and with my heart breaking, he'd take me to Babes and Ricky's, a small dive bar in South Central. That's as far as I've gotten on that one.
Wow, that is beautiful, Camille. Man, the earmarks that make, you know, the thing I love, a couple of things. The two-tiered harmonica, that tells me more about him than anything, than any bunch of sentences. Okay, that I love. The other thing is when he calls you by somebody else's name, and then the narrator tells the reader, he thought I was so and so. I love, in any type of writing, I love the aspect of surprise. You know, it's so beautiful to have somebody say something like, "Hey, Lucia," and then the character that the person is speaking to says, you know, "He called me by my mother's name," or something. You know, it's kind of a cool kind of thing to have that happen. Surprises in any shape or form are always really super cool when it comes to that. But go ahead and read the next section. That did you just start that?
Yes.
Great start. Great start.
Actually, yeah. You know what? Actually, that's kind of a lie. I had started it on our first workshop, and then I thought, this is going all over the place. I can't read this. Like, it's just too like all over. And then before starting here again, I went back and I looked at it and I was like, you know, I kind of like it. So then I kept working on it a little bit. Yeah. So
Also, I love, Camille, I love it when you talk about that guy who pours a bottle of hot sauce on everything he eats, and that he just had a big heart. And it was well balanced, and you know, like in 2 or 3 sentences, we know the character, and now you can move on with the story. Get on with the story, because now we know the character. I have in my head an image of that person, you know, and it gives me a grounding point to accompany the narrator through the story with. Okay,
yeah.
so I'll be quiet now, and let's hear some more.
Okay.
I agree. I really got a sense for him. I felt like if I met him at a party, I would already know him. The only thing that I found in the very beginning was I had once you started going into your descriptions, like maybe 4 sentences in, I landed. So I'm wondering if the first couple of sentences couldn't be moved somewhere else, or like maybe there's a different place for them, because I felt like I got lost in the very beginning. But once you started going into describing, I think you were describing the area, I was hooked into it. I was dead center into the middle of it. And it's like the first couple of sentences almost seemed irrelevant. So maybe they need to go someplace else, or maybe they are irrelevant. I don't know, because this was just the first time I heard it. But I dropped down into it after the first couple of sentences.
Okay.
So I think that's where the power started for me.
Okay. This is another one that some of you have heard, I think, and it's sort of part of the same things that I'm working on. I'm not really sure where to take it yet. I don't know if these are going to be like a series of short pieces or a longer story or what, but it's all from that time period in my life. When my dad was, before he died, and when he died, and all of that. So anyway, but Jimmy, I don't think you heard this one, because I read this when you were in New York with your daughter. So I wanted to bring it back and get some feedback as well.
Okay, can I add one thing? Remember, Camille, whatever you do, just remember this, all of you, remember this. There is no standard structure that applies to everyone generically. That happens when you're a writer and you begin to write for other people's pleasure and satisfaction, your editor in New York, your publisher, your friends, then you begin to keep everything contained, and you call it poetry prose. I don't know what you call it. But remember, when you're true writers, they're not true. They did something and then they just kept going with it until the horse was dead, right? This is what you have to do. Now, this is what you have to do. You have to always remember that what you're writing can have any structure over there. It can have any structure at once, any structure. It can be a small 2-paragraph vignette. It can be like Kingston. It can be 5 pages without a single comma. Just 5 pages of one continuous thought, based on the rhythm of your telling, right? Remember that you have to find the organic structure that you, Camille, have, only you. And that's what I want to stress that so much, because the greatness of literature, the greatness of writing, the greatness of feelings is that there's no form or shape until we give them shape and form. And it has to be our own. We cannot go to the textbooks for this crap. We cannot. You have to give it your own. I can refer books to you that are sublimely genius in their stream of consciousness. Jim Harrison, Legends of the Fall. My God, what a novella! Stream of consciousness, and then, oh my God, he just like, you know, and then I can give you 100 examples of structures, how people used their own particular sensibility to structure their stories their own way. And then when the editors got it and the publishers got it, they were like, oh my God, a new voice. That's all I'm asking, Camille, is believe in your voice. Believe in it. Okay, I'm sorry to talk. Go.
No, that's great. Thank you. Okay. December 5, 1992, nearing midnight. I startle awake from a deep sleep, and in the time it takes for my eyes to shoot open, I know. Sitting up in bed in the dark, I turn towards the phone and wait for it to ring. My father was dead. Don Camilo, as some knew him, was born to a father who'd been a street kid and a mother who died of tuberculosis when he was a baby. Growing up, he hungered for his father's love and pride, but never received it. At 8 years old, I'm told, he had his tonsils cut out with scissors and took the bus back home by himself. Eventually, he became an eye surgeon, bought his sister a house back in Mendoza where generations grew up. The photos of his wedding to my mother look like scenes out of The Godfather. When I was a toddler, he once operated on a pawnbroker's cataracts in exchange for a rifle. Don Camilo, who bought his Benson and Hedges on the black market, taught me the magical sweetness of a homegrown tomato, played the harmonica, danced the tango so suave. Neatly trimmed black hair, always combed straight back, crunchy from dippity-doo, and neat rows etched by the tines of his black plastic pocket comb. Impeccable style, even when sitting in the backyard in shorts and flip-flops, swatting mosquitoes. A few days after his death, I'm back in LA, selling some of his belongings that I'd stored in friend's garage. 2 young cholos walk up, black hair, slick back, bleach white wife beaters, and iron jeans. Their eyes gleamed as soon as their gaze rested on my dad's carefully polished Stacy Adams laid in a row on the sidewalk. A few minutes later, Beto comes out of the house. Oh man, you sold the shoes? How much? $1 a pair, I told him. You don't know how much those were worth, he yelled, bewildered. But I did. A daughter knows who'll do honor to her father's shoes.
Wow. Shoes, yes, wow. Uh, wow. You know, I want to say as a listener, I would like to hear more of that because specifically for me at least, and I'm sure that many millions of people around the world feel the same way. Their shoes for poor people are particularly important. I know that in prison, um, uh, I know guys that went to prison because they did an armed robbery so they could get enough money to go buy the pair of shoes in the window that they passed by every morning on their way to work, that they had to have those shoes. They just wanted to put the darn shoes on, even though their lives they couldn't afford a ticket on the bus, but they had dreams of buying those shoes, getting on a bus or train, and going to a city and becoming someone famous and important because the shoes, once you put them on, you have to follow up. You gotta do something because those shoes are important, right? My
I
dad
think you
always
see that even today, especially with the teenagers and their
Absolutely.
shoes. Yeah, and lining up to get them and fighting over them because they are the shoes to have.
Well, yeah. Listen, look. Read a poem by Reggie Gaines. He wrote this poem that was so beautiful about Nikes, and Nike came and gave him $1 million to buy the poem, and then Nike used it for their shoes. But you're right. He wrote this incredible poem about how the people he grew up with thought about shoes. And but Camille, that was absolutely beautiful. Keep it a page, keep it 10, keep it 20, keep it whatever you want to keep it, but say what you want to say without any hindrance of lacking self-confidence. Make sure that whatever you put down, you bring to it the full confidence of your heart. Man, that's really the key. The key is this. You can leave ideas outside the door. Anytime somebody writes from an idea, it's as dry and stale and lacking of life as a beach umbrella during a tsunami. It doesn't work. Forget about ideas, throw them out. Get to your topic with feeling. Once again, go back to the time when you were children. Go back to the time when you saw some ants. Go back to the time when you thought about what that ant was like or what that flower was like. You didn't think in terms of ideas. You thought about what it feels like. You want to reach over there and feel that flower. You want to feel the ant crawling on your thing. You feel fear. You feel excitement. You feel adventure. You feel mystery of life. Then you look up at the wind and you feel like the wind's talking to you. None of that makes sense, but it's great stories of who you are as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
I used to think rocks talk to me. And I wrote this book called When I Walk Through That Door I Am with Beacon Press in Boston, and it's became a huge seller. And the character in the book, the woman, just keeps telling the rocks tell her, tell me what you're feeling is, come close to me and touch me and I will take care of you. That's the rocks talking to her. Nobody's ever questioned it. Of all the reviews, everybody loves it. Don't ask me why, but something's there. So Camille, you have absolute freedom as a writer. Use it. Okay, go
I
ahead.
love your last sentence. That last sentence just made me want to sob. I mean, there was something that it just opened something in me. I love that last sentence.
Yes, the whole idea about feelings, man, you know what? Let your writing be driven by a strong feeling. And Camille, you've done that with the last 2 vignettes that you've read. You can tell, not you, Camille, but the narrator, the reader, the listener can tell that the narrator loves telling this story. We get it, and we love it. And so we're there already. You can manipulate us any way you want. And that's the beauty of being a narrator. If you're working at what you're doing and it's good, then you get to manipulate us any way you want. And it's a beautiful thing to have that kind of power, to be able to create a world for the reader. And that's what you're doing. Okay. I want you to go. Keep
I have
going.
a question. What do you think this is about, these stories? Like,
Good
what comes
question.
across as what it's about?
Go ahead and answer that, everybody.
I think it's about love.
Your feelings
me-
and admiration for your father. Is it your father, right?
Mhm.
Because at first when you read, he had the dippity doo and the comb and then this one. I love how you could. It's not quite what you're asking, but what they were saying with the feeling, I can feel what the narrator's feeling when you're looking at the father sitting there in the perfect hair, but swatting mosquitoes in the shorts and flip flops. I mean, you could totally feel what the narrator's feeling about that character. But I thought it was about your father and maybe, I don't know, what your inspiration, awe of him. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe I don't need to worry about it too much and just keep going.
Hey, listen, let me just say one thing. Look, this is really, really crucially important. I want you to keep going too, but very crucially important and very in short order. You got to let the words, you have to let the words ride on your emotion. Much like fallen leaves from a tree over a creek fall and ride on the creek's momentum, on its current, on its stream. You don't use words to save you or save the story. No. You create this current of emotion that swirls around us and picks us up. And in that swirl of emotion, it will draw the words from the trees the way a windstorm does and carry it onto the creek water, and the creek water will carry it down to wherever it's going. Right? And along all those words that go into the creek water, which is your emotion, your emotional drive in the story, when all those leaves get on there, they're going to pass this little girl who's playing with twigs. They're going to pass these rocks that beneath them have certain gold that no one's ever discovered. They're going to pass the cabin on the right where an old man lives who's never come out. You see, the story comes to you in its simplicity if you drive it with your emotion in. It comes to you. That's what I get, Camilla, from your stories, is these stories are already in the universe. And somehow you stood still long enough to welcome them. That you welcomed them into your heart and you spent time writing them down. They came through you. That's what I think of these stories. They have such a natural sense to them that they seem to be coming through you. They're not forced. You can tell forced. Like in my work, I screw up a lot. I force things. And then remember that the best storytelling ever comes when the emotion is driving it. Because then there is no standard, there is no framework to judge it by, there is no critique. It's just, we sit there shaking our head wondering why we're so moved and so touched by it. It's the mystery of storytelling. It's what connects us all. The two stories you read connected me. Okay, go.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Is it okay if I reread that Jane Doe the poem, and because I'd like to get like feedback from that one?
Go for it.
Okay.
This is your hour. By the way, everybody, I want you to do this. When we reach the hour of 10 o'clock, I want you to spend 10 minutes with Camille without me. I want you to spend 10 minutes with her talking about her work, because I have to go in the other room where I have another 50 people waiting. Okay? Because we went over. At 10 o'clock, I have to go to the next room, but that doesn't mean you got to stop. I want you to stay 10 more minutes and give Camille her full time. Go, Camille.
Thank you. Dear Jane Doe, I will never forget you. I interpreted for your padrastro when they brought him from Santa Rita in shackles to the hearing where you insisted it was all a lie. You made it all up, that he'd never passed you around among strange men in back rooms all those years, starting when you were just 9 years old. The calico tape wasn't true. The pretext call wasn't real. You just acted out because you're a niña desgraciada, a bad kid. But you'd be good now. You cried and begged to go back home. You were betrayed and abused, derided and exploited by the people who were the closest to you and were supposed to love and protect you. Treated like human garbage by men with calloused hands, depraved hearts, and tequila on their breath. Your mother let it happen. Then she blamed you, as if a child could steal her mother's man, bring this on herself. Your half-siblings ostracized you for breaking up their home. Coming into adolescence, you were the one banished, excommunicated, sent to live in a foster home with strangers in a small town in the Central Valley, so far from family and friends and the world you knew and anyone who might even pretend to love you. Sweet Jane, I know how alone you are in the world and that now your most brutal abuser lives inside you. I want you to know that a stranger who only crossed your path once, many years ago, only knew you by a name meant to erase you, thinks of you often. And that's where I left off. Because I wasn't really sure what to say to her, or what I wanted to say just sounded kind of almost trite, about how to hold herself up, and make up somebody as of somebody who actually saw her and really loved her, to help her sort of fight off the demons inside of her who make her hate herself.
Is there a way that you could write what you just said to me? Said to me, put that into the next paragraph. Okay. I don't know what else to say to you. Whatever you said to me, because I can't repeat it. I want to help somehow to fend the demons off. Say that to me as a connective to continue on. I don't know what to say,
I imagined her like building an imaginary abuelita, like you would construct a Frankenstein, from like these different small little tidbits of moments in her life when people did see her for who she was and all the magic and beauty and possibility of her, and try to hang on to that and listen to that person,
You know what I love more than anything? I mean, I love what you're saying, and I love this piece. I really love it. And I just want to throw myself into this and say, I want to help you get through all of this stuff in any way that I can. But the idea that somebody could make up all these things, I could say a character, that's me. I made up so many things in my life, either to be able to feel care for myself, to be able to win somebody's affection, to be able to please someone. I continually made up things about myself that weren't true. And I wanted someone like you, or I was terrified of someone like you or the narrator, to come in and say, it's okay, Jimmy, that you made everything up. I needed somebody to say that to me instead of yelling that I was a filthy liar, that I just made stuff up, that I was no good. And here you have a narrator telling the character, it's okay for you to make up these things. I understand. Wow. That's like, my God, come on. That's like, wow. I mean, that's a point of view, a perspective in a short story from a narrator that we almost never see. So that's the beautiful thing about it. That's an amazing thing that the narrator has that type of compassion. And it made the character that she's writing about that much more common, connected to us, the reader. Man, am I connected to that person. I know that person. I walk with that person. I grew up with that person. You know, somebody who had to make up things in this world in order to have a presence. You know,
I'm so glad you're saying that, because that was the stuff that that's where I wanted to take it from the beginning, but I was like, this sounds, I don't know, I wasn't sure if I should do that. So now you
Well, I
just,
can tell you that the one thing I wanted to hear more of was about her demons.
mhm.
yeah. What gave this young person pleasure? What shamed this person? And what does she live with or he live with? You know what's there? How do they handle shame? What's the one thing that's never left their hearts? One moment in time that they've never been able to walk away from. You know, the idea that these characters have committed certain flaws against their own spirit that they can never walk back from. Wow. Wow. Like,
Okay.
yeah. I had a friend who ate mashed potatoes in the morning. Everybody in the restaurant ordered eggs or oatmeal. And here's this pendejo asking for mashed potatoes for breakfast. And I said, pues qué chingado, bro. Why do you always eat mashed potatoes? What's wrong with you? He says, I love my mashed potatoes, man. I don't know where that came from, but I think it was connected to him as his grandpa planting a tree one day and they ate mashed potatoes for lunch. I don't know. But little things like that that create a person's life. That's what writing is about. Writing has nothing to do with I recently read an interview about a writer. I felt so sad for her. I felt so sad because all she talked about was how great she was and how unforgiving she was in her opinion of people. And there was nothing there except this is what I want, 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 this is what I want. And I thought, boy, well, she must be a lonely person to need to bring everything in that she wants and how unforgiving she is of people's opinions and stuff. And I thought, what a sad person, you know? And I never thought of her like that. I thought she was rich with ideas and feelings and plans. No, it was, this is who I am, is how great I am. And I thought, wow, when you get to that place, I don't ever want to get there. I want to be at a place where I'm never great, where I'm always striving and the dream is always a foot beyond my reach. And I never get the damn thing. And I make a fool out of myself trying to get it. You know, hopefully if I eat mashed potatoes in the morning, I'll grab the dream, but I don't know. But anyway, so listen, I want you all to talk to each other right now for the next 10 minutes about Camille's work, and then we'll call it a day. I'll be back in. I have people coming in on this other one. So I'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Everybody do a little feedback for everybody now.
Camille, sorry. First of all, you will never sound trite talking about someone you care for. So I can't imagine you being so I hope you like shelve that notion, because you didn't sound trite when you started talking about her. And I was thinking about something I used to do with my high school students when they were struggling about sentence construction. And that was to just turn on the tape recorder and speak it in there and then listen back to it. Because when you started talking about her, it was all there anyway. And I know that's like I know it's kind of a childish,
Not at all.
but I think it's very helpful to read into something and then just hear back, and then you've already got what you want to say. And the second thing is, I know that drive from the first piece, the the slaughter fields at Coalinga, and you drive through. And I was curious, when you made that drive and what you're telling us, did that in any way, was that mirroring how you felt? Was there something in that 200-mile plus stretch of just one thing after another that if you've made that drive dozens of times, you kind of know every sign on the field? Was that, it sounded like that was mirroring you. There was something, maybe it was just me because that's how I feel on that drive. But it seems like it was all part of the parcel of what you were feeling as you drove. That was all. It's just a question. It could be just me projecting. But thank you. I loved the piece about the shoes when you read it the first time, actually. So I'm glad you wrote it again. Poverty and shoes, just they do go together in that sense. So thank you. It was amazing to hear it again for a second time. But the piece with, your father, Coalinga, that whole thing is, there's something so poignant about the way in which you wrote that drive.
Oh, good. Oh,
Is this a book? Are these chapters of a book?
I don't know what it is.
Oh, okay.
I'm just, getting it out. I'm just writing. I feel like I've had these stories in me for a very long time.
Putting out
I'm
there.
yeah.
I like that. Jimmy talks about that surprise and then not to dwell on it, but keep going. And I felt that way when you're talking about the tonsils, because, I've had mine out and I cannot imagine scissors and then going home on the bus by yourself. I cannot. But it was like a real quick surprise and grabs your attention and then you kind of keep going. And I really like that.
But it shows the fortitude. It shows
Yeah.
the strength. It shows the perseverance, or all of it. It just there's just keep moving on with life. That
Yeah.
inner
And that
strength.
absolutely, I agree. Because I was like, oh my gosh, I could never be that strong to do that. I mean, I was in bed for weeks and there's just no way. Of course, I'm kind of a pansy, but the tripe thing, sometimes I have to write, if that's what's all in my head and I want to write something different, I have to write it down and then push through that and other things come up and then I can go, it like blocks my mind because like, oh no, that's what typical, and it's like, oh, that doesn't sound, I'm like, ugh. And it gets really frustrating because I want to say something, but it sounds like what everybody else would say, a cliche or whatever. So sometimes I just write down the cliche and keep writing. I don't know if
I
that would
think for me it was a little bit also of like, who am I to give her advice,
Yeah, yeah. But
Which
like she said,
and I'm glad Antonio is here because I never wrote you a letter, Antonio, but that's part of what I struggled with that as well. Is like, who the heck am I to say anything to you after 36 plus years in prison? I'm going to give you advice. I'm going to tell you, like what's right or wrong or whatever and what's up and down. I mean, are you joking? Like, who
see
am
that
I?
that right there is a beautiful little poem. I mean, you could take those words, who am I, to, I didn't mean to interrupt your message to Antonio,
No, thank
but
you.
that writing that down, like Sue was saying, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Antonio.
Your sound is off, Antonio. I
Yeah.
can't hear you. Put your sound on. The first icon on the bottom, click on that.
It looks like a mic. If you start moving the,
Looks like a flower and like a mic.
if you move the cursor, then it comes up on the bottom of the screen, and then you can go click on it. It's the one on the left out of the three.
Well, his computer might be, the actual computer, he might have his sound all the way down. Is your
I also
sound up
have
on the computer?
I
See,
also have 5 icons, so I think what's going on is I think depending on the different program you're running,
Yes.
we've all got different stuff, which is
No, I have
confusing
5
sometimes.
icons too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I wish we could take a picture and then turn it, show a visual.
Well, he
Yeah.
might have his sound off on the computer and then it won't come up anyway. So he's got to get his sound on the computer.
Yeah.
Who's going to read next week?
I'll read.
Okay, Sue and Leslie, you read next week? Are you okay with that?
Susan has been asking. Oh, sorry. Susan's like,
Susan,
yeah.
you got to get your sound together.
It's the streaming, Jimmy. Apparently, there's some kind of an issue with one of the I keep getting a message. The stream is not connecting. Is it possible that we could use Zoom, or is that not possible?
I don't think it's possible because Gabe's got this new thing going on where we're going to post it up for hundreds of other people to hear your stories. It could be publishers, it could be other poets, it could be other writers, it could be you could be creating a whole community out there in the world, your own community of people who like email us and say, "Can I please speak to Leslie?" Because her story was about my life or something like that, you know. So Gabe's got this thing called Restream, and it's going to garner quite a bit of attention for all of you reading. So rather than just end up at a dead, rather than end up at a dead end with me just helping you write, I would really like to get other people, real people in the world, listening and saying, "Oh, I love that story," and getting and becoming your patrons, so to speak. Like I could see Camille. I could see some publishers writing Camille about those stories. I could literally see some people being interested in publishing those in the Bay Area
Wow.
or New York or somewhere. Yeah. But listen, no, so we're going to stay with this format. Susan, I'm going to email you later. Not today. It'll probably be Monday or Tuesday or so. Or do you have Gabe's email address, Kay?
Kay
I mean,
left.
Susan, do you have Gabe's email address?
Yes.
Okay, well then email Gabe and work that out. Because it seems to be working okay with everybody. We just have to learn how not to sabotage ourselves. But listen, I have to go. You all can stay on as long as you wish. I'm gonna check out. I have a big group waiting for me in the next room, and I will see everybody next Saturday at 8 o'clock. But I want you to come and read. So I say Leslie and Sue are going to come and read next week at 8 o'clock, and then after that we'll have Jan and Antonio, and then Susan, get your things working so I can hear your stuff. Get them working. Also, I want to ask everybody on here now. I want somebody to run my Facebook because number one, I never get on it. And I've got like 12,500 followers. And I just closed down Cedar Tree last week and it had 1,000 followers or 10,000. I don't know how many it had. I don't know. I don't get on it. I don't know how it got made. I don't know anything about it. But I need somebody to run my Facebook page so we can start posting these things up so that all 20,000 people who visit it can hear you read. And if they want to subscribe to you, email you, I don't know. I need somebody to run my Facebook page for me. So think about that and get back to me. I will see you all later, and stay on as long as you want to talk to each other, okay? And I'll see all of you at 8. And I can't tell you how much I love doing this with you guys. It's what I do in life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too, guys. I gotta go out of town, so
Well, I have to go back to bed, so I am going to check out here.
okay. Feel better.
I have to add that mine is beyond rough. I got onto a new medication about 4 weeks ago, and that kind of hosed everything, to put it bluntly. But I'm getting there. So, but I will read next Saturday. That's great. It's just that I actually went through all my folders in the past few weeks, tore out everything,
Yeah.
and then decided to tie the lines I would salvage, and then started from there.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at. It was a lot of discarding, but it was worth it.
Well, good.
So it'll be small pieces. And oh, Camille,
Yeah.
have you read Denise Levitov's small book? I think it's called Tessellations or Tesserae.
No, I haven't.
Because Tesserae by Denise Levitov is where she uses many times just very small pieces from her life. So I was just thinking that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was just a thought. It's a small book, and it's older, but
I'll
think
look
like
for it.
I think
Yeah.
like all Denise Levertov,
Huh.
you know,
Okay.
it's always readable, you know, if you know what I mean. And there's a
Mhm.
few really sweet pieces about her family. That's what made me think about it.
Okay. I'll
That's
look.
all.
Yeah, it's helpful to just read and, see different ways of approaching, and
Mhm.
that kind of comes in somehow on its own, but it's percolating back there. I don't know. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hey, Antonio, hope we hear you next week.
Yeah, Antonio, the muted Antonio. Oh no.
Email Gabe and ask him, Antonio,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
usually we can hear you. Usually your sound works. So it's